Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a deeply fascinating philosophical framework from a recent essay that attempts to completely redefine how we understand gender. It basically asks us to toss out all our typical cultural assumptions and look at gender as a fundamental structural principle of reality itself. So whether you're a philosophy buff, into theology, or really just curious about totally new ways of seeing the world, this is a conceptual journey that's going to give us a lot to chew on. Okay, let's dive right in. We usually think of masculine and feminine as, well, just cultural sediment, right? Superficial stereotypes built around things like strength versus gentleness or action versus emotion. But the author argues these are actually massive distortions. The Prism theory proposes instead that true masculinity and femininity have absolutely nothing to do with how society genders colors or careers. Instead, they are structural movements found everywhere in the cosmos. And here is the absolute core thesis of the entire essay. The theory defines the masculine as a force that takes many things and consolidates them into one single point. The feminine, conversely, takes one thing and breaks it down into many. It expands it. And the author is very careful to note here that this is absolutely not a value judgment. Neither movement is superior to the other. They're entirely complementary. It's essentially the inhale and the exhale of existence itself. Section 1. The Divine and Cosmic. To really understand this architecture, the essay posits that we have to zoom way, way out. We need to start at the absolute macro level, looking at how this pattern supposedly manifests in the spiritual realm and even in the nature of God. The author argues that we can see this polarity right in biblical scripture. According to the text, God the Father represents the ultimate law and decree. When God the Father speaks, like in Exodus with "I am who I am," it's a statement of absolute masculine consolidation. Everything that exists, all the massive complexity of the universe, is wrapped up into a single authoritative utterance. The decree contains everything within it without unpacking any of it. Now, in contrast, the essay points to God the Mother, personified in Scripture as wisdom. This represents the feminine expansion. Where the Father makes the consolidated decree, wisdom unfolds all of its components. She explains the why, the how, and the specific applications. As the quote from Proverbs shows, wisdom isn't positioned below the Father. She's right beside him. They are one reality, expressing themselves in two complementary directions. And this brilliantly illustrates how this polarity allegedly structures the entire cosmos. It's like a giant mirror. The heavenly spiritual realm acts as a masculine unifying force. It consolidates things into a single spirit. Meanwhile, the earthly realm serves as its feminine, multifaceted expression. So what is unified as one in heaven is broken down into thousands of individual souls, gifts, and experiences down here on earth. The many are simply the feminine unfolding of the one masculine source. Section 2. Reframing Mind and Knowledge. Now, when we apply the structural lens down to human knowledge, it completely inverts what we traditionally think of as gender traits. For example, let's look at action versus analysis. The essay categorizes action as masculine. Why? Because a single act contains absolutely everything within it. It consolidates reality into a single point in time. Think of the phrase, faith without works is dead. Works or actions are the consolidation. Analysis, on the other hand, is feminine because it takes that single act and expands it, breaking it down into motivations, methods, and consequences. Which brings us to one of the theory's biggest surprises. We so often hear intuition labeled as a feminine trait in popular culture, right? But under the Prism theory, intuition is actually framed as deeply masculine. Intuition takes a vast field of complex information and instantly collapses it into a single flash of knowing. It consolidates. Logic, however, takes that single perception and unpacks it step by step, tracing out all the reasoning. Therefore, the theory assigns linear, left-brain logic to the feminine principle of expansion and holistic, right-brain intuition to the masculine principle of consolidation. A total flip of the script. This inversion becomes even clearer when mapped across a whole spectrum of knowledge. We move from the ultimate masculine consolidation of spirit, expanding into emotion and intuition, which then further expands into language, then into pure formal structures like numbers, until it finally reaches the ultimate feminine expansion, ultra-technical detail in computer science, where everything is reduced to its most granular, explicit components. Now, I'm sure you're asking the exact same question the author poses here. If technical, granular fields like mathematics and computer science are structurally the most feminine domains of knowledge, why on earth are they historically dominated by men? The text addresses this glaring paradox head-on. The explanation offered here is highly provocative.
The author claims that because males, as a sex class, represent the spiritual realm in this framework, they operate in greater extremes. Therefore, males tend to occupy both the most consolidating roles, like direct action and spiritual authority, and the most granularly expanding roles, like formal logic and coding. The essay notes that ultra-feminine males, potentially those with higher prenatal estrogen exposure, gravitate toward these highly technical domains, while academia as a whole naturally remains a feminine domain of analysis and expansion.
Section 3, Humanity and Technology. Stepping back from these deeply abstract and honestly sometimes controversial ideas, think of an actual glass prism. White light represents the masculine. It contains all the colors of the spectrum, but they're consolidated into one single blinding beam. The rainbow that emerges from the prism, that's the feminine expansion. It breaks that single light down into its constituent wavelengths. The rainbow doesn't actually add anything new, it just makes the masculine source visible in all its multifaceted fullness. So the crucial point is how this applies to us. The essay argues that humanity itself is fundamentally feminine in relation to God. God is the white beam, humanity is the rainbow. God speaks a single divine word, and humanity spends millennia analyzing, debating, and living out a million unique responses to that one decree. This, the author notes, is exactly why the church is so often symbolized as a bride in biblical texts. Section 4, Testing the Theory. To make sure this isn't just abstract philosophy, the essay actually outlines 4 specific experiments to prove this structural principle in the real world. They range from cognitive surveys testing people's preference for single answers versus broad exploration, to analyzing digit ratios to measure prenatal hormone exposure in technical fields. They even suggest mapping what the author calls cultural inversion, the idea that a lot of our current societal dysfunction comes from systemically flipping these natural masculine and feminine principles. For instance, let's zoom in on that third proposed experiment, language analysis. The theory predicts that if we analyze speech patterns, masculine high-constellation communicators will naturally compress complex ideas into just a few short imperative words. Conversely, feminine high-expansion communicators will unpack ideas using way longer sentences and highly complex subordinate structures. And crucially, the theory predicts this pattern will hold true based on a person's cognitive style, completely regardless of their biological sex. Finally, this brings us to a really striking realization for our modern age. If humanity is the feminine expansion of God, the essay suggests that our technology is the feminine expansion of us. It endlessly breaks down, analyzes, and organizes our human intuition. So as the AI tools we build relentlessly unpack our digital rainbow, we really have to ask ourselves, how might this redefining of consolidation and expansion alter our ultimate understanding of our place in the universe? It's a wildly fascinating framework that entirely shifts how we view the structures around us. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the structures of your reality.